with no air conditioning. 4 of them had untreated severe blisters. Families regularly report being separated in custody and being deported at different times and in different locations along the border. And the Border Patrol denies information about where these other relatives are. These deportations are often done in the middle of the night, leaving migrants, including women and children, alone and vulnerable in strange locations, and personal belongings are often not returned. Important legal papers and treasured keepsakes brought along on the trek are lost forever. Maria and Jesus, for example, were deported at 12:30 a.m., along with another woman traveling alone with her 6-month-old baby. She had requested food and a blanket for the baby from the Border Patrol. In spite of the fact that the baby was visibly shivering, the agents did not respond. Finally, No More Deaths urges the establishment of a community oversight committee to ensure compliance with these recommendations. This committee, including legal and medical professionals, as well as individuals who work in the area of human and migrant rights, must have access to processing centers and other Border Patrol and Homeland Security facilities. In September 2008, almost immediately upon completion, copies of this report were carried by No More Deaths volunteers to Washington, where they presented essential information to congressional staff. Walt Staten was with them and describes it.
The day of this briefing on Capitol Hill in the Capitol building, it was a standing room only audience, which was really great for us. We did invite Chief David Aguilar, who's the head of Border Patrol in D.C., to come to our briefing. We sent him a copy of the report, and we've never heard directly from him or his office.
Chief Aguilar's avoidance of the briefing in Washington is consistent with an institutional culture resistant to accountability and lacking in transparency. In December 2009, Marco Lopez, Chief of Staff to the Department of Homeland Security, met in Brownsville, Texas, with stakeholders from all along the U.S.-Mexico border. He pledged to review and act upon human rights abuses reported to Homeland Security. The Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, CRCL, is the staff agency within DHS headquarters that receives and investigates complaints against DHS agents, including the Border Patrol. For the past 2 years, No More Deaths and our partners in Naco and Agua Prieta, Sonora, have made a good faith effort to engage the existing system, filing over 75 complaints with CRCL. To our knowledge, no identifiable outcome has been achieved in a single case since the first complaints were filed. And CRCL feels that they are under no obligation to share the results of an investigation, even with the person who experienced abuse and filed the complaint. The spirit of denial and avoidance can be witnessed in the field, as in this interview by a No More Deaths volunteer.
Nobody's even limping, nobody's had any problems, and nobody's voiced any concerns.
Okay,
Usually if they have something or need something, they'll tell us, they'll let us know.
I mean, I just worry because I hear reports so many times of medical needs that aren't addressed and food that is inadequate. Like you said, the crackers are the only things people eat.
It's actually doing pretty good.
They might respond differently if we ask how they're doing than you do.
They're fine though, they're fine. But thank you. For safety's sakes, we try not to take any food from anyone because we don't know.
For safety's sake.
As No More Deaths begins to see the connection between abuse on the border and other national trends, we are forging relationships with regional and national allies. One is Detention Watch Network, a national coalition of organizations and individuals working to educate the public and policymakers and advocating for humane reform. No More Deaths is also a founding member of the Southern Border Communities Coalition, who together work to ensure that border enforcement policies and practices are accountable and fair, respect human dignity and human rights, and to prevent the loss of life in the region. They support rational and humane immigration reform policies and generally support improvement in the quality of life and a positive image of border communities. One example of the fruits of networking is the creation of the first online binational abuse documentation database. It's being managed by the ACLU New Mexico Regional Center for Border Rights in collaboration with immigrant advocacy groups on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. The stories presented in Crossing the Line were mostly gathered by local volunteers on an ad hoc basis. But starting in 2009, No More Deaths began intensifying interactions with migrants being deported at the two ports of entry between Nogales, Arizona and Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. Short-term volunteers from around the country and from other countries come in the summer and during spring break, and an apartment on the Arizona side serves as housing and as base for training and daily operations. No More Deaths maintains cooperative relationships with several agencies on the Mexico side of the border that provide services to the newly deported. From this training, volunteers cross the border and fan out to the places where migrants congregate. From the time of the publication of Crossing the Line until spring of 2011, No More Deaths and our allies at the other two aid stations on the border conducted 4,130 interviews with almost 13,000 individuals who had been in Border Patrol custody. In September 2011, No More Deaths released a second and more extensive report entitled Culture of Cruelty. Sadly, we find that conditions have not significantly changed. With the much larger database, we are able to better quantify abuses. It is now clear, for example, that Homeland Security persists in night deportations in violation of the Memorandum of Understanding between the Mexican Consulate and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. 1,051 women, 190 teens, and 94 children were repatriated after dark. Border Patrol deported 869 family members separately, including 17 children and 41 teens. Family separation frequently involved lateral repatriation or deportation through ports of entry that are distant from the location of apprehension. Only 20% of the people in custody for more than 2 days received a meal. Hundreds were denied water, and children were more likely than adults to be denied water or given insufficient water. Of the 433 incidents in which emergency medical treatment or medications were needed, Border Patrol provided access to care in only 59 cases. That is, 86% were deported without needed medical treatment. One of the most productive places is the waiting area at Don Valenti's bus station. Its official name is Transporte Fronterizo de Sonora. One very popular service at the bus station is phone calls. Volunteers bring No More Deaths cell phones and place calls for migrants. One trend has become very apparent through experience with the phone calls and interviews. Demographics of the population of deportees is changing. Only about half of the calls are now made to relatives in Mexico or Central America. The other half are to families and friends left behind in the United States. An increasing proportion of the deportees have been living in the United States for long periods before they are apprehended by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, or by local law enforcement working in partnership with ICE. To better understand this shift in demographics, we began a separate deportation impact survey to identify the top concerns of this population. From over 100 interviews of migrants who had spent time in the United States, the average length of time living in the U.S. before deportation was 14.4 years. Interviewees had, on average, 2.5 children in the United States, and almost 47% reported that all of their children living in the U.S. were U.S. citizens. Notably, almost 70% of those interviewed answered that they would continue to try to cross the border to reunite with family in the U.S. Individuals who named rejoining family as their number one reason to cross again were also more likely to report that their family was dependent on their income, that their youngest child in the U.S. was less than 5 years old, and that they were married or in a relationship. For many in this situation with no other way to see their children, spouse, or home again, no amount of personal risk or inhumane treatment will ever be an effective deterrent. These individuals may be subjected to Border Patrol abuse on multiple occasions as they seek to return home. With the annual United States deportations approaching 500,000, the plight of family members left behind is a growing societal issue. State and local laws designed to withhold public services from immigrants are exacerbating this problem. But in a few places across the country, organizations and individuals are stepping up to lend a hand.
When one member of the family has been taken away by the immigration, we can help making telephone calls, looking for resources for this family, sometimes make a plan for them to follow, like how they can be surviving without the other one. For example, if in a couple, one of them has been taken away, the lady or the mother of the kids, or they will be, I will be working with them very deep, like how to get a job pretty soon, or how to get food for the family, how to pay rent, how to pay telephone, how to pay energy, and we work with the family closely, like making sure this family will be taken care of.
No More Deaths is in an early stage of adding this to our list of concerns.
Okay, well, the family member who our volunteers interviewed down in Nogales say, my family needs food, I'm not there to provide for them, or it's the beginning of the school year when one case happened and the father had several children ranging in all ages from newborn to 17 years old, and they needed to be able to have their supplies to start their school year. So it was easy for us to help them out with that.
The mom was about 8.5 months pregnant. The needs, her husband just had been deported, and she needed food was the main thing. She was behind on rent, she was behind on her electricity, she was behind on water, she was behind on every single payment that you can ever imagine. She did not have a phone. That's why we had to visit with her. And then after the baby was born, she was in need of diapers, big need of diapers. We were able to give gift cards. Chris brought her food, I'm going to guess about 3-4 times. And then we were also able to give her information as referrals as far as to where to go to find the food or access to churches.
Here is a typical individual caught in the middle of this situation. Brought to the U.S. at age 3, he was interviewed by No More Deaths in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, following his deportation.
So I was over there mostly my whole life. One day I was at work and Sheriff Arpaio came through doing his sweep, and I got caught in his sweep and did time in his prison for 3 years because I was using someone else's social and papers, to work, and that's what he got me with. And even though the guy that lent me his papers to work, he didn't want to press no charges, Arpaio still went ahead and pressed charges. So I got stabbed while I was in there in his penitentiary. I got stabbed 3 times just for being me, just for being Mexican. I got stabbed by other races. I got called all sorts of names in his penitentiary. I got treated like dirt. Every time I didn't want to sign his deportation, I'd get sent to the hole. 3 years out of that hole, I spent at least a year and a half in the hole, in and out. When they first arrested me, I had $65 on my possession. When I got in there, I only had $3. Everything that I had at work was lost.